Alright, welcome to the patch 25.05 or 15.5. This patch is going to be the official patch for First Stand for the international competition, the first one of this year, and it's going to be a long one when it comes to macro changes because lane swap is going to be fairly different. Now, here are the highlights of the patch. We're going to have some champions nerfs and buffs and adjustments, while the systems will also be changed. But it's going to be a patched focus on lane swaps because since the beginning of the year, we haven't felt that much of a change within the patch, whether in solo queue, whether it's in competitive, I would say. I think the main change was really how Riot has tried to change mainly Skarner, and Skarner has not been that good of an option before this patch, but they really decided to kill him not only because of the changes that we will see, but also because of the art steel nerfs that were inside the past patch as well. Okay, English. All right, so we're going to skip these. Basically, XX chests, we all know what happened. Riot eventually took back their decision with some changes, and that is completely fine. Anyways, we are going straight into lane swaps, basically. Right? So, for those who want to understand what's going on, is now you're going to have a lane swap detection. And this is going to be from minute 130 to 330. Right? Before, they wanted to make it 215 to mid lane and 330 for top lane. But eventually, from what I understood, they want to make it 130 for mid and top until 330 instead. Now, basically, they made some changes. So I'm a fan of this change for Tournament Realm and IELO solo queue, for example. But when it comes to new player base, I see this being toxic. Like, imagine you're just playing in Iron Bronze, or you new player coming in out of nowhere, and you decide to queue and you decide to go top instead of going bot for some reason. Okay, you have no clue of the game, you're trying to learn, and then you just see the lane swap, leave lane swap detection, something like that, flashing in your screen while being a new player. I don't think it's really nice, and especially most players from Iron to low master even, most players do not look forward to swap. Most players look to play the regular lanes or play the regular two top laners without jungler, for example, in some moments, especially in flex queue. But the thing is, if the team has no junglers, the above rule is disabled, which is what I was mentioning. If the team has two or more junglers will now be included in the check. So in case you would try to bypass this by bringing a smite to yourself, a second smite to yourself so you can go top, now they will disable it if they identify two jungle items instead, okay? So this cannot be applied, obviously. As well as the text warning, yeah. Champions who trigger lane swap detection will have a debuff, an icon over their champion, and repeated text warning and that they're taking lane swap penalties. While detected, defending turret has 95% damage reduction. So basically the turrets will be dealt no damage from until 330, and if it's detected. Now the turret will one-shot minions and will one-shot champions who are nearby. But there's a twist as well. Imagine you're trying to zone out Garen or any top laner from the top wave while you're doing lane swap. Basically, if it's sitting under tier 2 while being zoned out, the turret gold that is farming, the turret damage that is dealing to minions and champions, all of that will shift into the closest champion in the lane. In most cases, it will be top laners. So imagine you're trying to zone out and the turret is one-shotting minions. All of that gold, 100% of the gold and experience, is going into the top laner, regardless of being under tier 2. And imagine you try to execute yourself to the turret. You don't execute yourself. You actually give the kill to the top laner as well. So minions and champions are given fully to the person who you're trying to nullify. So it doesn't work. Offending champions gain 50% less gold and XP from minions. So yeah, basically, you not only you will share XP and gold with someone else, but you will also lose experience in gold from taking those minions. And if the secondary user leaves after 20 seconds, top lane, the effect will bypass 6 seconds for mid lane because it's a central part of the map, essentially. In top lane only, the defending turret also deals... Oh yeah, this is for top lane turret only, so basically, yeah, 1000% damage to champions, which means you basically one-shot the champion at that point. For me, this change, there's a couple of things you can do with this. Even in pro play, I don't think it will happen in solo queue, but for example, if this applies 330 for mid and for top lane, then there's something really simple that you sometimes can see with the meta being shifted this way. It's fairly simple. So imagine you have a Gnar top lane, or you have a champion that cannot have much interaction. You're playing against a Norn, you're playing against a Gnar, a Sign, whatever it is. If you draft, for example, a tank top instead, and you have Varus in bot, and let's imagine that your bot lane matchup you get countered and you want to lane swap, you cannot do this, right? You can't do this. This is not allowed. But there's something that you can do. Instead of sending your top laner top, you can send your top laner into bot to lane with your support. And the ADC, Varus, Ezreal, whatever it is, they get solo XP from top lane until 3 minutes 30. And at 3:15, holy fuck, at 3:15, the support can look to recall and open top to play the lane swap position. There's also the obvious strategy where you can lane swap before grubs, but that one is very popular. So I would say that you can do multiple scenarios where you can still manage to lane swap somehow, even though it will be more situational. So I would say if you're weak side top and you don't have a good bot lane matchup, you want to send your top lane into bot with your support, I think this one will be fairly popular, and you send your ADC solo experience for top lane until 3 minutes 30. Keep in mind, junglers can gank the lanes, okay? So if the jungler comes top and tries to gank you, lane swap detection will not be activated because the jungler is jungling and wants to gank, so he has a jungle item, and Riot was careful to implement this idea. But in case you try to do this before 3 minutes 30, then it will not function. It will not work. If you try to place your bot lane mid, it will not work, okay? So in case, for example, you're playing Vayne bot, you would play Vayne bot and they pick Galio mid because you just picked a mage that they want to nullify with Galio Vi type of composition. You can just place, for example, Vayne mid into Galio, you put your mid laner top, and then you have top and support in bot lane. Or you have a soaking top laner into mid as well. There's multiple variations you can do, but the most important thing that you can acknowledge is that there's a bypass into this, but not as obvious as before. I don't like the idea, however, that Riot is looking to implement this in general. I think this should be restricted into Tournament Realm and Apex tiers. So Master and above should have lane swap detection. Master below should not have lane swap detection, in my perspective. Because no one below Master, nearly no one does it as well. So if some players would do it in lower ranks, then okay. Praise to the person that is outmaneuvering the other laners or the other players in that lower rank. But the thing is, I don't really like the fact that they're doing it in a global scale because new and upcoming players will be heavily affected by this, from my perspective. But obviously it will shift lane swap how it's played nowadays, but there will always be a specific answer into it, regardless. Atakhan spawn influence. We're making some adjustments with Atakhan's form spawn rules around tower dives to better catch stats that happen between two of a team's towers in the same lane. Also increasing the effect on score from the first few kills and tower dives, which should result in your early game having more influence of seeing Runes or Voracious Atakhan. I don't fucking care. I think it should be 50-50. I think it should be RNG. I believe it should be RNG as well. Summoner's Rift map. The Noxus map has been updated to make it a little less dreary. Basically, they want to make the tone of Summoner's Rift more like the original, you know? So they sent the Gardener into the Rift to make it more appealing as it is now. And I agree, it doesn't look that good, even though it's Noxus themed. So yeah. Ambessa is getting her E decreased. This mainly affects her damage rotation, but also her wave clear. So it's being decreased by 20, and sometimes you would want to max this because of how quickly you can wave clear as well. So it's minus 20 damage, but the bonus AD will still be the same. They just want to remove how obnoxious she can be when she maxes out this ability. Aphelios, attack speed ratio increase. This is really good because Aphelios doesn't really want to build attack speed initially. He wants to do either Infinity Edge, LDR, and Collector, for example, or Collector LDR Infinity Edge, or Collector IE LDR, or Mortal Reminder, or Yuntal, or whatever the fuck it is. So since Aphelios mainly lacks attack speed, this is a really good buff for Aphelios because he will land more auto attacks within the shift of the game. Ashe, I believe she got Omega buffed before, so this is a fair enough change. I think the fact that the arrow would deal 100% damage for secondary targets, it was really obnoxious. So the fact that they're reducing ultimate damage, I mean, it will not change that much. I think Ashe will still be in a good spot, but it was completely obnoxious. There was a specific build, and there is a specific build that you could do. I can even show it to you guys, which was in lanes where you get Omega outranged, and even in themes of gameplay where you get outranged, you could do a Comet build with Hubris, Mana. And if the team had a lot of armor stack, you would go Black Cleaver, otherwise you go Shojin. And if they have shields, whatever, this is the type of build where you can do Serpents, for example. So this build in Ashe will still be good in some occasions, but still, I think it's a really small change because Ashe is still really strong with the changes they've implemented as well. Aurora damage is going to be decreased from her E, so basically she will lose not base damage, but percentage damage from her scaling, so it goes from 80 to 70% AP, and her ultimate will have less slow. So Aurora has been constantly getting changes and changes and changes because she was really obnoxious when she was released, and they shifted a lot of her identity from her original form. So they're reducing damage, and this might affect a little bit one-shotting potential in later stages, mainly because the slow will also be smaller, but Aurora will still be the specific champion where if you pick her and you want to make that specific pick happen, she will still function despite the 10% AP loss. Is it a big change? It kind of is, okay? So let's say you do Rabadon's third item and you have 500 AP, you will lose 50 AP, and it's not the end of the world, but it will still be felt with the 25% slow being reduced as well. So yeah. Cho'Gath, one of the most broken champions in my perspective, especially as a flex pick, because it could be played as mid lane. His Q will be reduced by 20 damage, and keep in mind, this is fucking ridiculous. He had 340 and he still has 320 with 100% AP. In my perspective, Cho'Gath is still in a great spot regardless of being nerfed. He will lose also 20 AP, 20 damage, in his W by the time he maxes it, but initially it won't make a difference. Usually you either max Q if you want to outrange your opponent, or you want to max E because you will be playing a melee matchup with with traits fairly happening, basically. And now the main change is instead of being flat 3% in damage in his E, now it will go from 2.5 to 3.5. So initially it will be weaker, but eventually as you scale, it will be strong as well. So yeah. And W, as mentioned in the chat, yeah, in some matchups you also want to do W, so basically they're reducing 20 here and 20 here, and in case you're playing melee matchups, then this will initially be a nerf, but eventually it becomes a buff by the time you scale. Elise, human Q is going to be also reduced by 20, only in base damage, and the Q initially will be reduced by 10, 10, 10, 10, and then it goes back to the core value. They want to reduce damage intake. Elise has been quite strong for a few patches, so they want to reduce it. Xante, one of my favorite changes of the patch is reducing damage on Xante. I think it's really stupid for him to have so much damage inherited on his kit, especially when it's meant to be a tank. He's a really bulky frontline, and when he ults, he becomes a lot squishier, but he should not be able to withstand the amount of damage that he does while dealing that amount of damage. You either deal more damage and you become really squishy, or you just bulk it up and you become annoying and you don't deal as much damage. That's what they're trying to do. Reducing 8 mark damage and from his passive, and also 20% from the all-out bonus through damage. Big fan of this change because this is a champion that is supposed to be tanky, flashy, and so on, but is not supposed to one-shot you at some point. You know, I don't like the idea. I don't think it makes any sense, especially when you cannot kill him. If he's on top of you, you don't even have time to hit him. So unless you're an Olaf or a Darius or whatever the fuck, if you're not a counter directly, you just get fucking smashed. And he has low mobility, that's true, but yeah, it's not supposed to deal that amount of damage. Mundo is being increased in his HP. I think Mundo is one of the champions that, of course, he's gotten hit with the art seal changes. But keep in mind that Mundo is really strong when he skills out, because not only becomes really obnoxious, but is one of those problems where if he skills really well, he will one-shot you, basically. So it becomes disgusting to play against, because if Mundo is on top of you at level 18, you just can't do shit. Now, the amount of games where you will face a Mundo at level 18 is not fairly high, right? Most of the games will be finished by then. But yeah, they want to give 27 HP so that he can bypass lane a bit easier as well. Even though Mundo has been played mostly as a jungler, but this is mostly, yeah, to give him a slight boost, even though I don't really like it. Poppy, AD growth increased, passive shield formula reworked, E damage increased. So HP growth goes up by 6. Passive goes from 13 into 11 to 20. Oh, okay. So basically this is a Poppy support nerf and a Poppy top lane buff overall. Because their E damage as well, yes, it gets reduced by 20 at level 1, but it scales with more bonus AD. So if you do Sundered Sky, as you usually do, in Poppy top lane, it will still remain basically the same number, even though they reduce 20 in early stages. And eventually the shields will be higher at later stages. They don't want it to be as obnoxious in early game, mainly because of Poppy support, on how much she can withstand and bypass the laning phase. So yeah, this hurts Poppy support, but eventually it becomes... Eventually, in later stages of the game, it becomes a buff for top lane Poppy, but a slight nerf for early game top lane Poppy, which can be completely fine once she reaches and ends her first item as well. Seraphine Q maximum damage increased. It goes from 60 to 75%. Okay, sure. Skarner, I don't think you really needed more nerfs. I think Skarner is one of those... is one of those options where people are overkilling Skarner's priority. There's a lot of answers into Skarner, for example. There's a lot of good champions that can play into Skarner, and there are a lot of compositions that can play into Skarner. Arceal got nerfed. He got nerfed a lot of times recently, and this nerf is only happening because his priority and presence is still way higher than it should be, when it's not as successful as before. Yes, he's obnoxious to deal against, but he's not as obnoxious as before. So I don't really agree with how hard they are going with this nerf. So duration is going to be decreased. I like the final attack bonus damage, because I don't think Skarner should deal the amount of damage that he used to deal with the Art Seal pre-nerf as well. And the cooldown is going up by 2 seconds in Ixtal's impact. So that's fucking huge. Skarner, if he keeps being B1'd, or if he's still going to be an option in most compositions or bans or whatever the fuck it is, I think people are completely griefing. Skarner is not in a good spot at all. it was not really in that great of a spot to be B1able or even banned. Imagine at this stage if it keeps happening. I don't really like it. I think it was too roughy. I think Skarner is fucking dead at this point. With art seal changes as well, it's gone. Moving on to Yorick. So he's been terrifying jungle because of how speedy his clear is, basically. So they're trying to reduce his jungle clear speed, and also trying to tweak him to not be as flexible as before. People have been doing the Leandri's build as well, as far as I know, and they don't want Yorick to be as quick as he is in the meta. Speaking about quick clears in the jungle, we have Zed. Zed is possibly the fastest clearing jungler with Ivern, I believe. I think it's 247 or 250, something like that. But they decided to buff him by 15% bonus AD and 5 damage on each rank. Mid lane Zed is not really in a good spot. Is in a decent spot, to be fair, because it can do Bruiser build instead of doing Lethality. Lethality itemization is not as good as Bruiser itemization on Zed nowadays, because Lethality items don't really justify to do it when you can just be an effective Bruiser on Zed with Voltaic Cycle Sword and Spear of Shojin, for example, and Black Cleaver, stuff like that. So yeah, they're giving him 15% bonus AD on top of the 5 base. So yeah, Zed jungle will definitely like this. It's a nice tweak, and Zed mid lane will also like this in some way. So yeah. Items. Staff of Flowing Water. Duration is going up by 2 seconds. Tal Wildarrows. Basically, melees will stack this quicker. So yeah. Some champions that use this, I mean, who can use this? Tryndamere, Yasuo, Yone. I mean, they all do Blade of the Rune King, but Tryndamere and champions that can utilize this crit will stack quicker with the Yuntal, and Yuntal is actually in a good spot. So yeah, we'll see more of this. Axiom Arcanist will go down by 2% in single target and 1% for AoEs. It's completely fine. I think champions that will have mana problems will still want to go mana flow band, and those that want to sacrifice the mana tools, they can't be as obnoxious in landing phase to try to salvage the mana loss, so they have to go for this to have more impact from level 6 onwards. But still, I think the mana flow / Axiom Arcanist battle will definitely be more clear now with the damage loss that they're trying to implement. Unflinching rune bonus resist goes from 2 to 6 at level 1, which is really big. It's a 4 flat buff for early game, and this is mostly an early game rune, I would say. You don't see this as a late game rune or whatever. You see this as a laning phase bypass to be withstanding burst with bone plating, for example. If you go bone plating with Unflinching, by the time you get CC'd, the amount of damage you will reduce is huge with this buff, I would say. Because before this, 2 resist only will not justify to go Unflinching over Overgrowth, for example. Overgrowth was a lot more reliable because it would just stack a lot more HP instead of the resist that you could have on this. So in case you don't really care about laning phase and you don't care about reducing the damage during the laning phase, you will still go Overgrowth in some cases, unless you're playing with an enchanter and you want to go with the Revitalize, for example. But in lanes where you are afraid of being solo killed, or where the opponent has a lot of bursting pressure, if you're playing against Elise or Necton, if you're playing against Syndra, stuff like that, then Unflinching will have more value in that scenario for sure. Not against poke, don't be misled by it, but against specific burst, this will be a better option now in those games where you don't want to be snowballed, or if you're afraid to die in the initial stages with burst. Once again, Sixth Sense, it's the most unpopular warding rune from the Domination tree, so they're giving it a buff for, especially for range, because range goes from 350 to 250 and 275 from melee into 250. So comparing this into the other trees, Grizzly Mementos is the Trinket Haste one, Deep Ward is just too good. Sixth Sense automatically sense a nearby interact and see no ward tracking into the team. I mean, sometimes this can be taken, especially when you're confident that you will snowball the game, right? but still, I think yeah, it's still a weird it's still a weird section of the domination tree, I would say. I think Deep Ward is really strong in comparison to the others, and Grizzly Mementos is in between doing fine, I would say. But yeah, as a TLDR of the patch, before we wrap up, let's do it. So lane swaps will still be doable, but in my perspective, what I mentioned was this should be implemented for Apex tiers and only Tournament Realm, not for the entire player base, because new coming players and coming players, this will be fairly toxic. As I've mentioned before, and just to give a really quick TLDR on lane swaps will still be doable when you send your top laner into bot in a weak side setup and you send your ADC against a non-interaction matchup in top lane, and then at 315, for example, when the effect is nearly lingering, you can send your support into top lane, and then suddenly you have your top laner laning against bot lane, and if they look to swap, then you can just relook to swap again and do as it used to be before as well. So you can put your ADC solo XP for a while, and you will still bypass some of this lane swap thingy. Keep in mind that mid lane will also be 330 instead of the 315, instead of the 215 that was initially planned, from what I've read. So it will also be 330 for mid lane. And by the time you want to set up for grubs, I mean, the swaps will still happen regardless, but do not lane swap or look to roam initially as a mid laner, as a support, as a bot laner. You don't want to do this if top laner is here. If you want to swap and send your bot lane into top, if you want to send your ADC into top and your top laner into bot, this is a fair strategy. You don't want to have both there. Your jungler can get it because he has a jungle item, so he will not trigger the lane swap detection if he has jungle item, okay? And even if he doesn't have jungle item, then it's still fine, because in games where there's no smite, which is really rare, you can lane as 2 regardless. So yeah, lane swaps are pretty much different, but still doable with some variables, basically. Atakhan should be RNG. I don't really like the way they're doing it. They're changing the map tone. Ambessa will lose some damage in wave clear. Aphelios, this is a really good buff because he needs attack speed. Ashe will still be fine. She will lose a couple of damage from her ultimate because she really got a huge buff in the last patch. Aurora will deal less damage and have less utility. She will still be okay, but it's a sizable nerf still. Cho'Gath will still be okay because his numbers are fucking broken. Eventually his E becomes a buff, but he loses 20 damage on Q and W, respectively. Elise will deal less damage by the time she maxes her Q, but Spider Q at level 9 will still deal the same damage. Xante will have less damage in his kit. It will have the same durability, just less damage, which I'm a huge fan of basically. Mundo will still be a very situational pick, but it will be increased by 27 HP so that it can withstand laning phase even better. Jungle Mundo will not change that much, honestly, even though there's people playing that Mundo jungle. But still, it's very dependent on what the opponent's composition is really picking in the first place. Poppy, this is a top lane buff eventually, and a support nerf in initial stages. Seraphine, it's a buff, doesn't change much. Skarner is fucking dead. Do not pick Skarner, please. Yorick will have less jungle clear. Zed is fucking nice. I think Zed is one of the best picks of the patch, considering how really fast his clear is and how he can become a bruiser with his current build. Full Tyke Cycle Sword, Shojin Black Cleaver. Really good champion ATM, I would say. Staff of Flowing Water will have 2 more seconds. Melees can now stack Yuntal a lot quicker. Axiom Arcanist will now be more clear to make a decision between Axiom and Mana Flow Band. And Unflinching Rune will now be a good option in my perspective. Will be a good option when you're playing burst matchups with Bone Plating. If you're afraid of being solo killed, if you're not going to utilize this rune initially, then you still go Overgrowth or you still go to another tree. But if you want to withstand burst, and Flinching and Bone Plating will be good options for you to take to bypass the landing phase, for example. Unless you're being poked out, because if you're getting poked out, you still want to go second wind over Bone Plating if you're not being bursted. And Overgrowth if you're not utilizing the Shield Bash or the Demolish rune as well. Sixth Sense, I mean, they reduced a lot of the cooldown. I'm not sure how this will end because Deep Ward is really fucking good, and Grizzly Mementos is a secondary option that I see mostly being popular. Maybe this will make Sixth Sense more popular, but I would say that this will only pop more in solo queue. I don't think people will really pick this in competitive. I think competitive will still be dominant with Deep Ward, mainly because of how effective it can be with coordinated vision. So yeah, these are the changes for 25.05. Remember, this is the first international event change. Not really happy with this patch. I think it's despite changing a lot because of the lane swaps in initial stages, it still doesn't fix most of the problems inherent in the current meta. Skarner was already dead, but they double hit him. And yeah, from the first part of the season, I don't really see that much of a change. From like the same champions are in the meta. Yes, one champion exits the meta, but people need to become more versatile on what the fuck they're doing, you know? Which is why Fearless Draft is good in a way, but it's bad in another way because you lose the possibility to counter Xante, you lose the possibility to counter Ambessa, you lose the possibility to counter whatever the fuck comes in because by the time it gets picked one time, then the champion is completely off. Either way, I'm not a big fan of Fearless Draft in the first place, but as a matter of fact, this patch doesn't really change much. Just be aware of lane swap detection. And yeah, that will be it for this patch. Thank you for watching. We'll be back for 25.06. Have a great one.